The escape pod spun through open space, and every light on the panel blinked red. I pressed my palm against the cracked glass and watched my home star shrink into nothing. Alarms screamed in a language my own ship had once spoken calmly. Now it only screamed. My name is Vaelthir, daughter of the Shankari Dominion, and in that moment, I was certain I would not live to see another sunrise. The pirates had come out of nowhere. Our transport ship never stood a chance. My guards pushed me into the pod before I could argue, before I could even say goodbye. The last thing I saw through the viewport was my ship breaking apart like a toy crushed by a giant hand. Then the pod's engine sputtered, and I was alone. For 3 days I drifted. My food supply ran low. The air grew thin and sour. I stopped counting the hours because counting made the fear worse. I thought about my mother, the Queen, and how she always warned me about the dangers beyond our borders. She never had to warn me about pirates. She warned me about something else entirely. Humans. From the time I could speak, I was taught that humans were the coldest, cruelest beings in the galaxy. My tutors showed me old records of wars, of cities turned to ash, of entire species erased because they stood in humanity's way. They told me humans felt nothing. No sorrow, no mercy, no warmth. A human soldier could look into your eyes and end your life without a single flicker of feeling. That was the lesson drilled into every child of my dominion. Stay away from human space. If you ever see their ships, run. So when my pod's sensors picked up an incoming vessel on the 4th day, my heart sank instead of lifted. The ship was human. I could tell by the shape of it, sharp and practical, nothing like the elegant curves of Dominion craft. I had 2 choices: wait for my air to run out, or open the hatch and hope the Dominion rescue fleet found me first. I chose to wait. But waiting was no longer up to me. The human ship locked onto my pod with a tractor beam, and I felt the gentle pull as it drew me toward its open bay. I pounded on the controls, trying to override the system, trying anything to break free. Nothing worked. My pod was pulled inside a massive hangar, and the outer doors sealed shut behind me, with a heavy sound that echoed through the metal walls. I grabbed the small blade hidden in my boot, the one my mother insisted I carry for emergencies. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. The hatch of my pod hissed open on its own, and I braced myself for whatever monster stood on the other side. Instead, I saw a face. A human face, tired and lined with sweat, framed by short dark hair. He wore a stained work uniform with tools clipped to his belt, and he looked at me the way someone looks at a puzzle they did not expect to solve today. He raised both hands slowly, showing me his empty palms. "Easy," he said. His voice was low and calm. "Nobody here is going to hurt you." I did not lower the blade. My arm throbbed where I had struck it against the pod wall during the crash landing, and pain made it hard to think clearly. I demanded, in the common trade language, that he step back or face the consequences. He actually smiled. Not a cruel smile, something closer to amusement, like a parent watching a child try to look fierce. "That's fair," he said, and he stepped back exactly 1 pace. "My name is Cade. This is my ship. You're safe here, whether you believe that or not." Safe. The word felt like a trick, a bait dangled in front of prey. I had heard stories of humans using kind words before turning cruel, luring victims into comfort before striking. I kept the blade raised, even as my vision blurred at the edges. Blood loss, exhaustion, fear. It all crashed into me at once. "Whoa, hey." Cade's voice changed, sharper now, more urgent. "You're hurt. Your arm. It's bent wrong. Look, I'm not armed. I'm going to come closer and help you, and you can keep that little knife pointed at me the whole time if it makes you feel better." I wanted to argue. I wanted to warn him that I was a princess of the Shankari Dominion, and that harming me would bring down consequences he could not imagine. But my legs gave out before I could form the words, and the last thing I remembered was strong arms catching me before I hit the floor. When I woke, I was lying on a soft bed in a small white room. Machines beeped steadily beside me, and a clear tube ran into my arm. My broken bone had been set and wrapped in a supportive brace. For a moment, I forgot where I was, and panic surged through my chest. I sat up too fast, and pain lanced through my arm. "Careful, you'll pull the stitches." Cade sat in a chair near the door, reading something on a small handheld device. He looked up when I gasped, and he set the device aside without rushing toward me. That surprised me. A predator would have moved fast, would have wanted to control me the moment I showed weakness. He simply waited, letting me catch my breath. "Where am I?" I asked, my voice raspy. "Salvage ship called the Marrowwind. We picked up your distress signal 3 days ago and finally caught up to your pod this morning. You've been through a lot. You should rest." I studied him carefully, searching his face for any hint of the cruelty I had been promised my entire life. I found none. Only tiredness, and something that looked almost like concern, though I refused to believe that was truly what it was. "You fixed my arm," I said slowly, testing him. "Why?" Cade tilted his head, as if the question confused him. "Because it was broken." "That's not an answer." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I don't know what kind of answer you're looking for. You were hurt. I know how to fix a broken bone, so I fixed it. Doesn't seem complicated to me." It seemed very complicated to me. Every story I had ever heard insisted that humans calculated every action for personal gain, that kindness was simply a tool they used to lower defenses before betrayal. I searched his words for the trap, the hidden motive, the price I would eventually be forced to pay. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my hand instinctively moving toward my side, though my blade was gone, taken while I was unconscious. "Quadge." Cade's expression softened, just slightly. "Right now, I want you to drink some water and get some sleep. After that, we'll figure out how to get you back to your people. That's it. That's the whole plan." I did not believe him. I could not let myself believe him. Not yet. I had spent my entire life learning that trust given to a human was trust wasted, a mistake that ended in ruin. So I turned my face away from him and stared at the blank wall instead, waiting for the moment his kindness would crack and reveal the monster underneath. He did not push. He simply stood, refilled the water glass on the small table beside my bed, and left the room without another word. The door closed with a soft click, not a slam, not a lock turning to trap me inside, just a door, closing gently, the way a person closes a door when they are trying not to disturb someone who needs rest. I lay there for a long time, listening to the quiet hum of the ship around me. Somewhere down the corridor I heard voices, low and easy, someone laughing about something I could not make out. It did not sound like the voices of monsters. It sounded ordinary, almost warm. That frightened me more than any threat could have. I closed my eyes, but sleep would not come easily. Every time I drifted toward it, I saw the image of Cade's raised hands, empty and open, offering nothing but help. I told myself it was a performance. I told myself that somewhere on this ship, the true nature of these people was waiting to reveal itself, sharp and cold, exactly as I had been taught. But a small, stubborn part of me, the part I usually kept locked away, whispered a different question into the dark. What if everything I had been taught was wrong? I pushed the thought away and pulled the thin blanket tighter around my shoulders. Whatever waited for me on this ship, I decided I would face it with my eyes open. I would not be fooled by gentle words and careful hands. I would watch, and wait, and find the proof I knew had to be hiding somewhere beneath the surface. Because humans did not save people out of kindness. They could not according to everything I had ever known. Could they? The next morning, I woke to the smell of something warm drifting through the vents. My stomach ached with hunger, before my mind fully caught up with where I was. I sat up slowly this time, mindful of my healing arm, and looked around the small room properly for the first time. It was plain, almost bare. A narrow bed, a chair, a small shelf with a few personal items that did not belong to me. A folded blanket sat at the foot of my bed that had not been there when I fell asleep, as if someone had come in during the night to make sure I stayed warm. The door slid open before I could decide whether to feel grateful or suspicious about that. A young woman stepped inside, carrying a tray with a covered dish. She had light brown hair pulled back in a simple braid and an easy, unguarded smile. "Morning," she said cheerfully. "I'm Ellie. I fly this bucket of bolts when it decides to cooperate. Cade said you were awake, so I figured you might want something to eat that isn't nutrient paste." I did not move to take the tray. Ellie did not seem bothered by my silence. She simply set it on the small table beside my bed and stepped back, giving me space the same way Cade had the day before. "It's just soup," she added, noticing my hesitation. Nothing fancy. Figured your stomach could use something gentle after a few days floating in a tin can. I glanced at the bowl, steam curling up from its surface, and my body betrayed me with a low growl of hunger. Ellie laughed, a bright, honest sound, and turned to leave. "Take your time," she said. "Nobody's going to rush you into anything here." I ate the soup slowly, watching the door long after she left, waiting for some trick to reveal itself. None came. The soup was simply soup, warm and plain and better than anything I had eaten in days. I hated how much comfort I found in something so small. Over the next several days, my arm healed enough that I no longer needed the brace, and Cade allowed me to move freely around the ship, though I suspected someone was always watching, ready to stop me if I tried anything foolish. I used that freedom to study the crew the way a scholar studies a dangerous creature from behind protective glass. There were 4 of them total. Cade, who kept the engines running and always seemed to have grease on his hands. Ellie, who flew the ship and hummed songs I did not recognize while she worked. A quiet man named Daniel who handled cargo and rarely spoke unless spoken to first. And a woman named Grace, who tended to injuries and illnesses, the one who had actually set my broken arm while I was unconscious. I watched them eat together in the small dining area, watched them argue over something as trivial as whose turn it was to clean the mess hall, watched them laugh at jokes I did not understand. None of it matched the stories I had grown up with. Where was the coldness? Where was the calculated cruelty? I began to wonder if this crew was simply an exception, a rare group of humans who hid their true nature better than most. So I tested them. During a meal on my 5th day aboard the Merrow-Wind, I deliberately spoke without using the polite address forms my culture required. It was a small insult, subtle enough that only someone paying close attention would notice, but rude enough to provoke a reaction from anyone who cared about status and respect. Daniel simply shrugged and asked me to pass the bread. I tried again the following day, this time questioning Cade's competence in front of the others, suggesting that a proper engineer would have already found a faster route back toward Dominion space. I expected anger. I expected him to snap at me, to reveal the temper my tutors had always described. Instead, he set down his tools, looked at the star charts spread across the table, and calmly explained the exact reasons our current course was safer, even if it was slower. He answered every question I threw at him with patience, never once raising his voice, never once looking at me the way a predator looks at something it intends to devour. It unsettled me more than open hostility would have. By the end of the first week, I had convinced myself that their calmness was simply a more sophisticated form of the coldness I had been warned about. Perhaps humans did not need anger to be cruel. Perhaps they were simply patient predators, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, content to let their prey grow comfortable first. I confronted Cade about it one evening, while he worked alone in the engine room, surrounded by humming machinery and the smell of heated metal. "You are all pretending," I said, standing in the doorway with my arms crossed. "This kindness, this patience, it is a performance. You are waiting for something, waiting for me to lower my guard, so you can take whatever it is you actually want." Cade did not look up immediately. He finished tightening a bolt, wiped his hands on a cloth, and only then turned to face me. There was no anger in his expression, but there was something else, something tired and a little sad. "You really believe that?" he said. It was not a question. "I have been taught this since I was old enough to understand words," I told him, my voice rising despite my effort to stay controlled. "My people have records. Wars your people started. Cities destroyed. Entire species wiped away, because they stood between humanity and what it wanted. You cannot erase generations of history with soup and a warm blanket." Something shifted in Cade's face then, a flicker of old pain that he tried to hide, but could not fully mask. He set the cloth down and leaned against the workbench, crossing his arms in a way that mirrored my own stance, though his posture held no aggression. "I'm not going to pretend humanity has a clean history," he said slowly. "We've made terrible mistakes. We've hurt people we shouldn't have hurt. I won't stand here and tell you otherwise, because that would be a lie, and I don't lie to people I'm trying to help." His honesty caught me off guard. I had expected denial, defensiveness, perhaps even anger at being accused. Instead, he offered something closer to sorrow. "But the stories you were taught," he continued, "the ones about humans wiping out species, just because we wanted more space, more resources, more power? I'd bet good money there's more to those stories than what your tutors told you. History gets rewritten by whoever benefits from the rewriting. That's not just a human problem. Every civilization does it. You would say that, I snapped. Of course you would defend your own people. I'm not defending anyone, Cade said, his voice firm but still gentle. I'm telling you to look for yourself, instead of trusting what you were spoon-fed as a child. This ship has an archive terminal in the common room. Uncensored records, the kind traders and travelers pass around because no single government controls all of it. Go look. Compare it to what you were taught. If I'm wrong, you'll see it clearly. If I'm right, you'll see that too. I wanted to refuse. I wanted to tell him that I did not need to prove anything, that my people's records were beyond question. But a small, persistent doubt had been growing inside me since the moment Ellie handed me that bowl of soup with nothing but kindness in her eyes. I hated that doubt. I hated how it made my certainty feel fragile. Fine, I said, lifting my chin. I will look. And when I find nothing but more evidence of your people's cruelty, you will admit that your kindness was always a performance. Cade did not argue. He simply nodded, as if my challenge did not threaten him at all. Deal, he said. The terminal's unlocked. Take all the time you need. I left the engine room with my hearts pounding, more from anger than fear now. I told myself I was doing this to prove him wrong, to confirm everything I already knew. But as I walked toward the common room, my footsteps slowed, and a quiet voice in the back of my mind whispered that I was not entirely certain what I actually wanted to find. The common room was empty when I arrived. The rest of the crew apparently occupied elsewhere on the ship. I sat down at the terminal, my hands hovering over the controls, hesitating longer than I wanted to admit. Finally, I typed in a search for the very first conflict my tutors had taught me about, the one they called the beginning of humanity's cruelty toward other species. The screen filled with records, images, testimonies, official documents from multiple sides of the conflict. I began to read. The story I had been taught said humans attacked without warning, destroying a peaceful settlement simply because it occupied territory they desired. But the records in front of me told a different sequence of events. There had been a distress signal, ignored by the settlement's own government for political reasons. There had been a rescue attempt gone wrong, followed by accusations and counter-accusations that spiraled into something no one could control. There was tragedy on every side. Confusion, fear, terrible decisions made by frightened people trying to protect their own. It was not the simple story of predator and prey I had been raised to believe. I sat back in my chair, my mind spinning. This could be a trick, I told myself. These records could be falsified, planted here specifically to manipulate travelers like me into doubting their own history. I needed more proof. I needed to see everything, not just one carefully selected example. I stayed at that terminal long after the ship's lights dimmed for the night cycle, reading account after account, cross-referencing dates and names, searching for the lie I was certain had to be hiding somewhere within all this information. But the deeper I dug, the more the picture shifted, layer by layer, until I could no longer tell which version of history I actually believed. At some point, exhaustion pulled my eyes closed, despite my best efforts to stay awake. I do not know how long I slept slumped over that terminal, but when I woke, someone had draped a blanket over my shoulders, and the room was empty except for the soft glow of the screen, still displaying the last record I had been reading. I looked around, half expecting to see Cade standing nearby, waiting to gloat over my confusion, but no one was there. Whoever had covered me with the blanket had done so quietly, without waking me, without demanding acknowledgement or thanks. That small, silent kindness troubled me more than any argument could have. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders and turned back to the screen, determined to find the truth, no matter how uncomfortable that truth might turn out to be. I no longer knew what I was hoping to discover. I only knew that I could not stop searching now, not when everything I had once believed felt like sand slipping through my fingers. Somewhere deep inside me, a quiet, frightened voice admitted what I refused to say out loud. I was afraid I had spent my whole life believing a lie. I spent the next 3 days barely leaving the common room. Grace brought me food and quietly set it beside the terminal without comment. Ellie tried once to coax me away for rest, but when I refused, she simply left a cup of something warm and did not push further. Even Daniel, who rarely spoke to anyone, left a small light on in the corridor one night when the ship's main lighting dimmed, as if he had noticed I preferred not to sit in complete darkness while I worked. I read everything I could find. Treaties broken not by humans but by desperate governments trying to save themselves at the expense of others. Wars that began with a single misunderstanding, then spiraled, because pride would not allow either side to step back. Records of human colonies destroyed by other species first, before any human military ever fired a shot in return. And then I found the one record that broke something open inside me. It was called the Halvan Incident, named after a small mining colony on the edge of explored space. My tutors had taught me this story differently than the others. They said humans discovered the colony held valuable resources and decided the easiest solution was to eliminate the population rather than negotiate for mining rights. It was held up as the clearest example of humanity's coldness, proof that human leaders viewed other lives as obstacles to be removed rather than people to be respected. The actual records told a story soaked in grief rather than calculation. A group of human settlers had arrived at Halvan searching for a new home, unaware the colony already existed due to a communication failure between two separate exploration fleets. Fear and confusion led to an exchange of weapons fire before anyone fully understood what was happening. By the time both sides realized their mistake, dozens of lives had already been lost, human and otherwise. What followed was not celebration or conquest. It was mourning. Public records showed memorial services held by the very people my tutors claimed felt nothing. I found speeches given by human leaders, admitting fault, refusing to hide behind excuses, promising to rebuild communication protocols so such a tragedy could never happen again. I found the names of every person lost that day, both human and otherwise, listed together on a single memorial that still stood, according to the records, centuries later. Humans had not celebrated Halvan as a victory. They had turned it into a permanent reminder of what happens when fear moves faster than understanding. They built their entire system of first contact protocols around preventing another Halvan from ever occurring again. I stared at the screen until the words blurred together, and something inside my chest cracked wide open. I had spent my entire life believing that humans were incapable of remorse, incapable of grief, incapable of holding themselves accountable for their mistakes. But here was proof, undeniable and thorough, that they had done exactly that, publicly and repeatedly, long before I was ever born. My hands began to shake. I closed the terminal screen and pressed my palms against my eyes, trying to hold back the wave of emotion threatening to overwhelm me. Everything I had built my understanding of the galaxy upon, every warning, every lesson, every fear that had shaped how I viewed an entire species, had been built on a foundation of carefully edited half-truths. I do not know how long I sat there, frozen, unable to move or speak. I only became aware of another presence in the room when I heard footsteps stop a respectful distance away. Veilthir? Cade's voice was soft, careful, the way someone speaks when approaching an injured animal they do not want to frighten away. I did not lift my head. I could not bring myself to look at him, not when everything I had accused him of, everything I had believed about his people, now sat exposed as a lie I had carried my entire life. "Hey," he said, kneeling down so he was closer to my eye level instead of standing over me. "Talk to me. What did you find?" My throat tightened, and when I finally spoke, my voice came out broken and small, nothing like the composed tone a princess of the Shankari Dominion was supposed to maintain at all times. "Everything," I whispered. "Everything I was taught. It was wrong, not exaggerated, not simplified. Wrong. My tutors, my own mother, they told me stories that were built to make me hate an entire species before I ever met a single one of you." Cade did not say anything immediately. He simply stayed where he was, patient, present, letting the silence stretch until I found the strength to continue. "I called you a monster," I said, my voice cracking further. "I held a blade to your throat when you tried to help me. I accused you of performing kindness as a trick, and this entire time, you were simply being decent, and I was too blind with fear to see it." "You weren't blind," Cade said gently. "You were taught to see things a certain way, before you ever had the chance to look for yourself. That's not the same as being blind. That's just being lied to by people you trusted." The kindness in his voice, even now, even after everything I had accused him of, undid the last piece of control I had been holding on to. Tears I did not know I had been suppressing broke free, and I pressed my hands against my face, ashamed of how weak I must have looked, ashamed of how wrong I had been about everything. I expected him to leave me alone with my shame, or perhaps to offer some hollow reassurance and walk away, satisfied that his point had been proven. Instead, he moved closer and simply sat down on the floor beside my chair, close enough that his shoulder nearly touched mine, saying nothing at all. He did not try to fix my tears. He did not tell me to stop crying, or that everything would be fine. He simply stayed there, a quiet, steady presence, allowing me the space to fall apart without judgment or impatience. "I don't know what you people actually are," I finally admitted, my voice raw. "I was told you were heartless. Every record I just read proves otherwise. I don't know what to believe anymore." Cade was quiet for a long moment before he answered. "We're not perfect," he said. "We make mistakes, sometimes terrible ones, but we don't hide from them. We don't pretend they didn't happen. We carry them, and we try to do better because of them. That's not heartlessness. If anything, it's the opposite. It takes a heart to grieve something you caused and choose to change because of it." I turned to look at him then, really look at him, past the fear and the propaganda and every warning I had carried since childhood. I saw a tired man sitting on a cold metal floor beside a stranger from another world, offering nothing but patience and honesty, expecting nothing in return. "Why do you care?" I asked. "I threatened you. I insulted you. I accused your entire species of unforgivable cruelty. Why would you sit here with me after everything I've said?" Cade considered the question for a moment, as if he wanted to give me an honest answer, rather than a comfortable one. "Because you were scared," he said simply. "And scared people say things they don't fully mean. Because somewhere underneath all that fear, you were brave enough to actually look for the truth, instead of just clinging to what was comfortable. That takes courage most people never bother finding." His words settled into me slowly, like warmth spreading through cold limbs after too long in the freezing dark. I had expected humans to be incapable of understanding fear, incapable of patience, incapable of grace towards someone who had wronged them. Cade offered all three without hesitation, without demanding I earn them first. "I am sorry," I said quietly, "for the blade. For everything I said. You have shown me nothing but kindness since the moment you found me, and I repaid it with suspicion and accusations." "You don't need to apologize," Cade said. "You were protecting yourself with the only tools you had. That's not something to be sorry for. It's something to understand and move past." I do not know how long we sat there together on the floor of that common room, the terminal screen still glowing beside us, with the record of the Halvin Memorial displayed in quiet, permanent letters. Eventually my tears slowed, and a strange calm settled over me, unlike anything I had felt since the moment my pirate-attacked ship broke apart around me. For the first time since arriving on the Merrowind, I did not feel like a captive waiting for betrayal. I felt, impossibly, like I might actually be safe. "What happens now?" I asked eventually, my voice steadier than before. Cade shrugged, a simple, honest gesture. "Now you rest. And when you're ready, we figure out how to get you home, if that's still what you want. Nobody's rushing you toward any decision tonight." I nodded slowly, grateful for the lack of pressure, grateful for the space to simply exist without demands placed upon me. As I stood, my legs unsteady from hours spent hunched over the terminal, Cade rose as well, offering a hand to steady me without hesitation. I hesitated only a moment before accepting it. His grip was warm and solid, nothing like the cold, calculated touch I had once imagined belonged to every human hand. As he helped me toward the door, something inside me settled into a new, unfamiliar shape. Not trust, not entirely, not yet, but something close to it. Something that felt like the very first step toward believing that everything I had been taught to fear might have been built on nothing but lies designed to keep me small and afraid. Walking beside him down that quiet corridor, I realized I no longer knew which version of the galaxy was true, the one I had grown up believing, or the one slowly revealing itself through quiet kindness and patient honesty. But for the first time in my life, I wanted to find out for myself, rather than simply accepting whatever story I had been handed. That desire alone felt like the beginning of something entirely new. 6 days later, alarms blared through the Merrowind, And this time the danger was not distant. Ellie's voice crackled over the intercom, tight with urgency, calling everyone to the bridge immediately. My heart pounded as I ran through the corridors, memories of the pirate attack flashing uninvited through my mind. When I reached the bridge, the main view screen showed 3 sleek warships cutting through the darkness toward us, their hulls unmistakable. Dominion vessels. My people had finally found me. I should have felt relief. Instead, dread settled heavy in my stomach. "They're hailing us," Daniel said from his station, his usual quiet calm edged with tension. Cade glanced at me, and I saw the same worry reflected in his eyes that churned inside my own chest. "Your call," he said. "You want us to answer?" I hesitated only a moment before nodding. The image that appeared on screen showed Admiral Korath, a stern officer I recognized from my mother's court, his expression already twisted into suspicion as his eyes landed on me. "Princess Veilthir," he said, his voice sharp with formality. "You are alive. We feared the worst when your transport was destroyed." "I am unharmed," I said carefully. "Thanks to the crew of this vessel. They found my pod and cared for me until I could recover." Korath's gaze flicked toward Cade, and something cold settled behind his eyes. "Humans," he said, the word dripping with distaste. "Prepare to be boarded. The princess will return with us immediately, and your crew will submit to questioning regarding your intentions toward Dominion royalty." My stomach dropped. "Admiral, that is not necessary. They rescued me. They have shown me nothing but—" "Silence," Korath snapped, and even through the screen, the harshness of his tone made me flinch. "You have clearly been influenced by whatever manipulation these creatures have subjected you to. Once you are safely returned home, proper counsel will help you understand the danger you narrowly escaped." Anger flared hot beneath my ribs, chasing away the last remnants of fear. "I have not been manipulated," I said, my voice rising with a strength I did not know I still carried after everything I had endured. "I have seen the truth for myself, Admiral. The truth my own tutors kept hidden from me my entire life." Korath's expression darkened further. "Enough. Prepare to be boarded, or we will consider this vessel hostile and act accordingly." The transmission cut, and silence fell across the bridge like a heavy blanket. I turned to find every member of the crew watching me, waiting to see what I would do, none of them pushing me toward any particular choice. "They're going to board whether we agree or not," Ellie said quietly, watching the warships draw closer on the display. "Cade, what's our move?" Cade's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady when he spoke. "We're not going to fight 3 Dominion warships. That's a fight we can't win, and honestly, it's not a fight worth having." He turned to me, his expression open and honest, despite the danger closing in around us. "Veilthir, whatever you decide, we'll respect it. If you want to go with them, we'll let you go without a fight. Nobody here is going to force you to stay somewhere you don't want to be." His words struck me harder than any threat the Admiral had made. Here, in the middle of a crisis that could end in violence, Cade's only concern remained my choice, my freedom, my ability to decide my own path forward. No manipulation, no pressure, no demand that I owed him loyalty for the kindness he had shown me. That, more than anything else, solidified the decision already forming in my heart. "I am not leaving you to face them alone," I said firmly. "Not after everything I have learned. Not after everything you have done for me without asking for anything in return." Grace stepped forward from where she had been standing near the medical console. "Veilthir, you don't have to prove anything to us. If going back keeps you safe, that matters more than making some kind of statement." "This is not about proving anything," I said, shaking my head. "It is about telling the truth. My people have been lied to, the same way I was lied to. If I return quietly and let this misunderstanding stand, nothing will ever change. But if I speak the truth publicly, perhaps something finally will." Cade studied my face for a long moment, searching for any sign of hesitation or doubt. Finding none, he nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "Then we face them together." The Dominion warships closed the remaining distance, and within minutes, armed soldiers began boarding the Marrow Wind through a secured docking connection. I positioned myself near the airlock, standing tall despite the fear still trembling beneath my composed exterior, determined to meet whatever came next without flinching. Admiral Korath himself led the boarding party, his expression severe as he stepped onto the ship, flanked by soldiers whose weapons remained lowered but ready. His eyes swept across the small human crew standing united behind me, before settling on my face. "Princess," he said, his tone clipped with barely restrained frustration, "step away from these humans immediately. You are not thinking clearly." "I am thinking more clearly than I have in my entire life," I replied, refusing to move from where I stood. "Admiral, I read the true records of the Halvan incident. I read the actual history of the First Contact Wars, not the version taught to Dominion children to breed fear and obedience. I know the truth now, and I will not pretend otherwise simply to make this easier for you." Whispers rippled through the soldiers behind Korath, uncertainty flickering across faces that had clearly expected a straightforward rescue rather than open defiance from their princess. Korath's expression tightened further. "Those records are forbidden for good reason," he said sharply. "They are manipulated propaganda designed by humans to weaken our resolve against them." "Then explain to me," I said, my voice steady, despite the danger of challenging him so openly, "why the human memorial for Halvan lists the names of both sides equally. Explain why human leaders publicly apologized for their role in that tragedy centuries ago, long before I was born, long before any of us had reason to expect a human princess would one day question the official story." Korath's mouth opened, then closed again, no ready answer forming behind his eyes. I pressed forward, unwilling to let the moment slip away, now that I had finally found the courage to speak. "These humans," I continued, gesturing toward the crew standing quietly behind me, "found me broken and afraid, drifting through space, with no one else to help me. They set my arm. They fed me. They gave me space to grieve when I discovered the truth about everything I had been taught. Not once did any of them ask for anything in return. Not once did they threaten me or manipulate me into loyalty. If this is the coldness we were warned about our entire lives, Admiral, then I fear it is our own leaders who have shown me true coldness, hiding the truth from an entire generation to keep us obedient and afraid." The bridge fell utterly silent. Even Cade, standing just behind my shoulder, said nothing, allowing this moment to belong entirely to me. I could feel the weight of every soldier's stare, the uncertainty rippling through the boarding party, as my words settled into the space between us. Korath's composure finally cracked, frustration bleeding into something closer to genuine anger. "You would choose these creatures over your own people? Over your own family?" "I am not choosing them over my people," I said firmly. "I am choosing the truth over comfortable lies." "There is a difference, Admiral, though I understand why you might not wish to see it." For a long, tense moment, nobody moved. I watched Korath's hand hover near the weapon at his side, watched the soldiers behind him exchange uncertain glances, unsure whether to follow orders that suddenly felt less clear than they had moments before. Then, unexpectedly, one of the younger soldiers stepped forward, lowering her weapon fully. "Admiral," she said quietly, "if what the princess says is true, perhaps we should allow her to speak further before taking any action we cannot undo." Korath rounded on her, fury flashing across his face, but the damage was already done. Doubt had entered the room, and doubt, once planted, proved difficult to fully uproot. "This is not a debate," Korath snapped, though his voice carried less certainty than before. "The princess will return with us. That is the order from the queen herself." "Then let the queen hear the truth directly from me," I said, standing my ground. "I will return, Admiral. I have never intended to abandon my people or my responsibilities. But I will return on my own terms, with the truth intact, not silenced by fear of what that truth might mean, for those who have built their power upon hiding it." Korath stared at me for a long, tense moment, clearly weighing his options against the growing uncertainty rippling through his own soldiers. Finally, stiffly, he gave a curt nod. "Very well," he said, though the words seemed to cost him considerable effort. "You will return with us. But know this, Princess. Your mother will not be pleased with the story you intend to tell." "My mother deserves the truth," I said quietly, "whether it pleases her or not." As the soldiers began to withdraw, preparing to escort me back toward the waiting warships, I turned to face Cade one final time, before stepping through the airlock. His expression held no triumph, no relief at having won some argument, only quiet respect for the choice I had made entirely on my own. "Thank you," I said softly, for never once asking me to choose you, for letting this decision belong to me alone. Cade offered a small, genuine smile. That's kind of the whole point, he said. Trust isn't worth much if it's forced. Go tell your truth, Veilthier. We'll be here. I held on to those words as I stepped through the airlock, leaving behind the small, strange ship that had somehow become the safest place I had ever known, carrying with me the truth I intended to speak, no matter the cost it might demand. The throne room of my mother's palace had never felt so cold, despite the warm golden light pouring through its tall windows. I stood before the queen, still dressed in the simple traveling clothes Grace had given me, feeling entirely out of place among the polished marble and glittering banners that had once felt like home. My mother sat rigid on her throne, her expression unreadable, though I knew her well enough to recognize the storm brewing behind her calm exterior. Admiral Korath stood to her right, having already delivered his report of everything that transpired aboard the Merrowind. You defied a direct order, my mother said, her voice quiet, but sharp enough to cut. You publicly questioned Dominion history in front of soldiers, in front of a human crew, in front of anyone who might carry that story beyond these walls. I told the truth, I said, refusing to lower my eyes, despite the weight of her disapproval pressing down on me. The same truth you have known, and hidden from our people for generations. A ripple of tension moved through the small gathering of advisors, standing along the throne room's edges. My mother's expression flickered, just slightly, confirming what I had already suspected. She had known. Perhaps not every detail, but enough to understand the shape of the lie she had allowed to continue. You do not understand the delicate balance required to maintain peace and order across our territories, she said, her voice tightening further. Fear of humanity has kept our people cautious, kept us from repeating mistakes that could cost countless lives. Fear built on lies is not protection, I said. It is control. And I will not stay silent while an entire generation grows up believing hatred is the same as wisdom. The throne room fell into stunned silence. No one, as far as I knew, had ever spoken to the queen with such open defiance, least of all her own daughter. I braced myself for punishment, for exile, for whatever consequence my honesty might invite. Instead, after a long, heavy pause, something shifted in my mother's expression. Not surrender, not entirely, but something closer to exhaustion, as if she too had carried the weight of this lie longer than she wished to admit. What do you propose then? She asked quietly. That we simply announce to our people that everything they were taught about humanity was manufactured to keep them obedient? Do you understand the chaos that could follow such a revelation? I propose the truth, delivered carefully, delivered honestly, I said. Not chaos for its own sake, but the beginning of something better. A chance to build real understanding between our people and humanity, instead of fear built on deliberate misinformation. My mother studied me for a long moment, and for the first time in my life, I saw something like respect flicker behind her guarded eyes, mixed with something that looked almost like regret. You have changed, she said softly. The daughter who left on that transport would never have spoken to me this way. The daughter who left on that transport believed a lie, I said. I no longer do. The following weeks tested every ounce of resolve I possessed. Word of my defiance spread quickly through the palace, then beyond it, carried by soldiers who had witnessed my stand aboard the Merrowind and could not stay silent about what they had seen. Some citizens dismissed the story entirely, clinging tightly to the comfortable narrative they had always known. Others, curious and increasingly doubtful, began quietly requesting access to the same uncensored archives I had discovered. My mother did not immediately embrace transparency, but she did not silence me either. Slowly, carefully, restricted records began opening to public access, first in small amounts, then in growing numbers, as pressure from curious citizens built beyond what the palace could easily contain. Change did not happen overnight, and resistance remained strong among those who benefited from the old fear. But the seed I had planted continued to grow, slowly cracking open decades of carefully maintained deception. Throughout it all, I thought constantly of the small human crew who had shown me nothing but patience and honesty when they owed me neither. I wondered if Cade and Ellie and Grace and Daniel had continued their travels, unaware of the quiet revolution their kindness had helped ignite across an entire star system. 3 months after my return, I requested an audience with my mother, prepared for whatever resistance she might offer to the decision I had already made in my heart. "I wish to serve as a liaison between our people and humanity," I said, standing before her throne once more, though this time my voice carried none of the fear that had colored our previous conversation. Someone must begin building real communication, instead of fear-based avoidance. I believe I am well suited for that responsibility. My mother regarded me for a long moment, weighing the request carefully. "You would leave the comfort of the palace for a life spent traveling among the very people you were taught to fear?" "I would leave a life built on lies," I said, "for a chance to build something honest instead." To my surprise, she did not argue. Perhaps she recognized the same stubborn resolve in me that had once defined her own younger years, before the burdens of leadership had worn certain parts of her down. Perhaps she simply understood that stopping me now would only delay the inevitable. "Very well," she said finally. "You have my permission, and my blessing, though I suspect you would have found a way to pursue this path regardless of what I decided." I could not fully suppress the small smile that answer brought to my face. "You know me well, Mother." Arranging passage back toward human space proved easier than I expected, thanks in part to growing diplomatic interest following the public revelations that continued rippling through Dominion society. Within weeks, I found myself once again standing in a docking bay, waiting as a familiar ship approached, its sharp, practical lines unmistakable against the darkness of open space. The marrow wind docked smoothly, and I felt my hearts quicken as the airlock cycled open. Cade stepped through first, and for a moment, neither of us spoke, simply taking in the sight of each other after months apart, each uncertain how the other might have changed. "You look good," he said finally, a warm smile spreading across his tired, familiar face. "Diplomatic work suits you." "It has been a long few months," I admitted, stepping forward, "but worthwhile ones." Ellie appeared behind him, grinning widely, as she pulled me into an unexpected, enthusiastic embrace. "We heard the stories," she said, pulling back to study my face. "The whole quadrant's talking about the princess who cracked open generations of propaganda. You've been busy." "Someone had to start," I said, laughing softly despite myself, still adjusting to how easily warmth came to me now, after spending so long guarded and afraid. Grace and Daniel offered their own quiet greetings, and for a moment, standing surrounded by the small, strange family that had once been strangers I feared, I felt something settle deeply within my chest. Not the formal comfort of a palace, not the familiar routines of a life I had always known, but something entirely new. Something that felt, impossibly, like belonging. Later that evening, after the initial excitement of reunion had settled into quiet conversation over shared food, I found myself standing alone with Cade near the observation deck, watching distant stars scatter across the endless black beyond the viewport. "You really did it," he said, breaking the comfortable silence between us. "Changed the whole story your people were taught. That's not a small thing, Veilthir." "I had help," I said, glancing toward him. "I would never have found the courage to search for the truth if you had not challenged me to look for myself, instead of simply accepting what I had been told." "You did the hard part," Cade said, shaking his head slightly. "I just pointed you toward a terminal." I studied his face in the soft light of the observation deck, remembering the first moment I had seen him, hands raised, offering nothing but calm reassurance to a frightened stranger holding a blade to his throat. So much had changed since that day, not just in the galaxy around us, but within myself. "I once believed humans were incapable of true feeling," I said quietly. "That your people had erased sentiment entirely, becoming cold and calculating in its place. I have never been more grateful to be proven wrong about anything in my life." Cade turned to face me fully, something soft and unguarded settling into his expression. "For what it's worth," he said, "I never once thought you were heartless either. Scared, maybe. Guarded, definitely, but never heartless." The distance between us felt smaller than it ever had before, and without fully deciding to, I found myself stepping closer, drawn by something warmer and more certain than fear had ever been. Cade did not move away. Instead, he opened his arms slightly, an invitation rather than a demand, leaving the choice entirely mine, exactly as he always had. I stepped into that embrace, and for the first time since my transport ship broke apart among the stars, I felt no urge to search for hidden danger. no instinct urging me to brace for betrayal. I simply felt held, warm and steady, surrounded by an honesty I had once believed impossible to find, among the people I had been taught to fear above all others. "Thank you," I whispered against his shoulder, "for never once treating me the way I expected to be treated." "Thank you," Cade replied softly, "for being brave enough to find out the truth for yourself, even when it would have been easier not to." We stood there together for a long while, watching the stars drift silently beyond the viewport. Two people from entirely different worlds, who had somehow found something neither of us expected in the other. I thought of my mother's throne room, of Admiral Korath's suspicious glare, of every lesson I had been taught since childhood, warning me away from exactly this moment. None of it mattered anymore, not against the quiet certainty settling into my chest, warm and unshakable, telling me I had finally found something real. "Home isn't a place," I murmured, more to myself than to him, though I knew he heard me clearly. "It is whoever chooses to hold you when you are breaking." Cade's arms tightened slightly around me, and I felt him smile against the top of my head. "Then I guess you're home," he said quietly, "for as long as you want to be." I closed my eyes, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath my ear, undeniable proof of everything I had once been taught to doubt. Humans were not heartless. They never had been. I had simply needed the courage to look past the fear I inherited, and find the truth waiting patiently on the other side. Beyond the viewport, the stars continued their silent, endless drift, indifferent to the quiet revolution, unfolding within one small observation deck. But I no longer needed the stars to tell me where I belonged. I already knew.